So today we're going to be talking about how to fight with your spouse. Fighting is part of marriage. It's something that happens to every couple, no matter how good-natured we both are. Starting from Adam and Eve, married couples fight from where we are going to settle down to how to divide up our roles and responsibilities, all the way to who left the cap off the toothpaste. We fight. So the question isn't how to prevent fights, but rather how to fight fairly and effectively so that you both can win. My name is David Feldman, a licensed marriage and family therapist and founder of Building Great Marriages. My mission is to help couples have a connecting, loving, and intimate relationship, which I believe is available to all. Welcome to my channel, my Twitter space. So let's get back to how do we fight fairly with our spouse? First of all, she should just know I'm in general a pacifist. I mean, in my opinion, the best fights to get into are the ones that we don't have. But as mentioned, this isn't realistic. We must prepare ourselves for the inevitable struggles of living together as one, which include disagreements. And if anybody here has been married or is married, we know that those disagreements can escalate pretty quickly, right? Sometimes we'll be fighting about one thing or talking about one thing, and the next thing you know, we end up escalating into a much larger conflict than what we thought originally was going to happen, right? Which is unfortunate, but that sometimes happens quite often. Um, that's very normal, and it doesn't mean that you're not in a good marriage. If I like to say, just because you have a difficult marriage doesn't mean you're not supposed to be married. It just means that you are married, right? So here too, just because we fight doesn't mean that we're not supposed to be married. It just means that we are married because married people fight, right? So the question is, how do we fight effectively without tearing apart our relationship, without tearing apart our spouse, without causing permanent damage, without saying things that we're going to regret, without creating resentment, long-term resentment? So interestingly enough, a very famous marriage counselor named John Gottman, many people know him from the famous four horses of the relationship apocalypse metaphor that he came up with. He identified that there are three primary ways, three primary fighting styles of the happiest couples. So we're talking about couples who self-reported to be very happy in their marriage. And one of the questions that John Gottman asked them was, okay, well, let me hear a little bit about how you two fight. And the happiest couples broke down pretty evenly into the following three categories. Number one, the first category is what you would expect. Those who talk about it and work it out, right? We would think that, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We get into an argument and our arguments don't get that passionate, and there's a lot of conversation, a lot of respectful dialogue, and they come up with some sort of solution or compromise or some sort of alternative way of looking at it, and they move forward. Okay, great. That's intuitive, but the next two are not. So the second reported way that the happiest couples fought was with explosive anger. Okay, it's a little strange, but think like Italians around a dinner table. Just totally, if they get angry about something, they're completely yelling at each other, and it can get a little out of control, right? That's less intuitive, right? But the key to the way that they fought was that they always made up very intensely. Okay, I don't want to necessarily say great makeup sex, but you can read between the lines. There was a large disturbance of the force, so to speak, and but it always culminated in a heartfelt and reconnecting of the two people, the two spouses. So that's the second way. The third way, which to me is even the least intuitive, is couples that never talked about their fights at all. So they'd have fights that were pretty serious, right? We're talking about married couples here, so it could be about anything. And at the end of the day, what happened was they just didn't talk about it any further. They just chose that They're going to lick their wounds. Maybe she'd go to her room and he'd stay in the living room or whatever it was. And they'd have a cooling off period. And then they'd resume the relationship as if they had not fought at all. Nothing was really resolved. And they just moved on, right? And that seems like the least intuitive of all, because you're not going to acknowledge the fact that we just blew up at each other. We're not going to talk about the fact that there was massive disagreement about perhaps some foundational items, right? And yet, when he queried the happiest couples, so we're not talking about couples that were on the verge of divorce, we're not talking about couples that were um, always said that they weren't happy with their spouse or their marriage. We're talking about couples that said, yeah, I love my spouse, I love my marriage, and yeah, I'm overall very happy. And they could fall out into one of these three categories in terms of fighting. So, to be honest, as a marriage therapist, that oftentimes leaves me with more questions than answers. Why is it and how is it that I get the first one, right? Talk about things. That's what we teach as marriage therapists, right? That's what we teach, how to communicate to resolve issues. And yet we're seeing that couples who blew up at each other, or couples who went the exact opposite direction and decided to just drop the issue completely as if it never happened, report just as much relationship happiness and satisfaction as those who resolved it peacefully. So there's a lot of different ways to take a look at this, a lot of different ways to explain this, but this is what I want to talk to you about today. And this is really the core of the message that I want to give everybody today. And that is as follows. Well, what is the thread, in my perspective, the thread that holds all three of these couples together was not the way they handled fights, as we see, but where the fights fell out in their prioritization of their relationship with their spouse. Okay. What significance do fights have in a marriage? Each one of these couples puts the marriage first. Each one of these couples may get hot-headed, or they may get passionate, or maybe some of them are extremely stoic, or maybe some of them are very avoidant to, conflict averse. But no matter how they approached a fight always fell below the marriage. My love for you and my connection to you and my commitment to you and my decision to stay on a journey with you, the mission that we have together, is always above our disagreements. I'm yours and you're mine. And that's the priority, right? Fighting is not an opportunity for us to threaten our relationship. Fighting is not an opportunity for us to decide, well, we're just too different after all. Fighting is not an opportunity for us to say that we just can't get along. No, fighting is an opportunity, or it's an inevitability that helps two people, two halves of the same soul, fit together better than they did before. In order to do that, there's friction, right? You're not going to take a round hole and shove a square peg in there without causing a little bit of disturbance, right? That's just what happens. And that's the same thing with a couple, a married couple, right? You're taking a female and a male. You're taking different personalities and different histories and different ways of being and different character traits. And with all the different messages and the environment that we grew up in, and you're trying to recreate a oneness. That's not going to happen without bumping elbows, clanking knees, uh, a little bit of friction here and there, some disagreements, some massive opposite ways of seeing things. It's not going to happen, right? But when we put the marriage and our relationship on top of, above the fact that we're fighting, then fighting just becomes a tool through which our marriage can ultimately improve. And that's the key. That's what we have to bear in mind. And it's my position that the reason why all three of these couples, three different fighting styles, were present in the happiest couples is not because those are great ways to fight, but because what we're seeing is that in those couples, the marriage came first, the relationship came first, the respect and love they had for each other, the commitment to their marriage comes first. And when we approach a fight or an argument in such a way, then of course I'm more partial to the first. Like I said before, I'm the most partial to the best fights you can have are the ones you never get in. So I'm all about that. I don't like conflict. I don't like getting into fights. But if you are gonna, you know, knock it out with your spouse, then yeah, of course I like the first one best, which is to work it out. But I can definitely see, and I've definitely worked with couples where that is not the way they handle things, and yet they love each other very much, and they have a good relationship. So that being said, I don't want to leave everybody here who's calm, and I appreciate everybody who is participating in this Twitter space. Um, I don't want to leave anybody here without any real solid takeaways. Okay. What are some of the best practices if we are going to go toe to toe with our husband or our wife? Okay. The first one, as we just mentioned, is number one, do not make it about your marriage. I don't care what the conversation is, right? Don't make it about the marriage. What does that mean? Well, we make it about the marriage when the energy that we put into the fight rolls over and has consequences for the marriage. What does that mean? People walk out. You get into a fight, you're really upset at your wife, you burst out the front door, you get in your car, you drive away. Right? That's a huge loser, marriage loser move, right? That's abandoning her. And it goes both ways. Obviously, women do this too. That's abandoning your spouse, right? And so what you're basically saying is that thing that we are fighting about is so important to me that I'm willing to give you the message that I can abandon you and I'm willing to abandon us. Not a good move. Okay. Don't allow the fight itself this is included in don't make it about your marriage. Another aspect of making it about your marriage would be to disparage your marriage. So for instance, saying we never get along, right? Or I just can't live with you anymore. Right? Now you want to say, hey, you're acting like a real jerk. Okay, that's fair. Stop being nasty. Fair. Right? Obviously, that's not best practices, but that's not about the marriage. But saying things like we never get along, we just will never see eye to eye, that's making it about the marriage, right? And then finally, of course, this is the golden rule, never threaten divorce. Well, if we just can't see eye to eye in this, and maybe we shouldn't be married. Maybe we should have never gotten married in the first place. That's like a nuclear bomb, especially from a husband to wife. That's like massive nuclear bomb to your relationship. I work with couples where it may be 15 years later, and she tells me in confidence, she said, you know what? I have to tell you, I'm still holding on to something. And the second she says that, I already know what it is. 99% sure of what it is. What is it? 15 years ago, we got into a fight and he threatened to leave. And I've never really recovered from that. Now, of course, as a man, I'm thinking to myself, 15 years, most men recover in 15 minutes. They forget about it the next day. But for a woman, she may hold on to it for forever, literally forever. Okay, that's the first tip. So that's the first, don't make it about your marriage. The second tip, which is really important, is, and this is on a lower level, is keep it respectful. Okay, there's no excuse for completely losing it in a fight. You don't, after the fact, we don't hit the replay button and say, oh yeah, I can understand why you said that. No, keep it respectful. What does that mean? Don't curse at your spouse. That seems so obvious, but I'm sure there are many people who have lost it to the point where they use swear words at their spouse or even about their spouse, right? Especially, I hate to say this again, men, but especially husband to wife. It's like taking a knife and stabbing her in the heart. Okay. And this one is more applies to women than it is to men, but don't say things about your spouse that you will later regret. All women have very sharp tongues and they remember everything, and they're experts at making sure that you know as a man where you failed and where you're weak. And if they let loose, it can be devastating for the way the man sees themselves, and it can be devastating for the way the man feels about her. So we don't want to, we have to keep it respectful and have some, getting angry is not a license to just let it all out. Okay. And the third thing is, and this is a little bit more obvious, but to keep it focused on the subject at hand, right? If we get angry and the feelings start coming up, it's not your opportunity to remind each other of all the horrible things they've ever done since the beginning of creation. That's not what's happening here. We're talking about a particular topic, and it's a particular subject. And even though you may see some connections to things in the past, do yourself and do your spouse a favor. Keep it focused on the subject at hand. Okay. Because nothing's more frustrating. Well, there are things more frustrating, but it's very frustrating to be trying to get to the bottom. Don't forget, when we're in a fight, we're both trying to get our needs met. No one here is just on purposely being a jerk, even though it may feel that way. But we're both trying to get our needs met. So if my wife just completely derails me and starts talking about something that happened 6 years ago, or even 2 weeks ago, or even yesterday, it sucks the energy out of all the effort we're trying to get in to come to a resolution, which brings me to the last point, which is be prepared to make up. Have that as part of your strategy. Okay. If don't get into a fight that you're not willing to make up about, not worth it. Okay. If you're not prepared to have those conversations, and I understand that fights are oftentimes spontaneous, but we're talking about strategizing for the most important relationship in your life. This is it. Your marriage is everything. So be prepared to make up. What does that mean? Don't be stingy with apology. If you're not good at it, get good at it. Practice. Be able to admit something from their perspective. I can see how you see things this way, or, I thought about it, and I can understand why that's important to you. And now that you're mentioning it, I agree that is important. Don't have such an ego block that you can't see it from their way. Find a way to compromise. Okay, well, you want red, I want green. Let's settle on yellow, whatever it is. I'll tell you a quick story before I open up the conversation for everybody else. Um, my wife and I, we raised 6 kids together, and as you can imagine, uh, it's, it's a lot. She was a stay-at-home mom, and I was a full-time worker, and 6 kids is a lot. And to say that we used to fight every once in a while would be saying it nicely. And one one of the issues that we fought about was, as usual, some of the household responsibilities, who does what, you know. My wife always took care of all the doctor's appointments, and that included prescriptions. So one day she asked me, one of the kids was sick, and she asked me to pick up a prescription from the grocery store on my way home from work, and something happened, something came up. I forgot. I come home and the prescription's not there. So she says, oh, you forgot it. So I said, well, I'll watch the kids. You can go out and get the prescription because I forgot it. Meaning in my male stupid brain, I just assumed that even though I'd forgotten it, it's that's something she normally does. And since I missed my chance, anyway, needless to say, obviously, when I look back on it, you know, I didn't handle it the best way. We got into a fight about it, you know. And when we made up over it, I decided right then and there, and I told her this at the time, not only am I sorry about what happened, but I also told her that from now on, for the rest of my life, as long as I am capable of it, I am now responsible for picking up every single prescription, whether it's for me, you, the kids. She's not allowed to go pick up prescriptions anymore. Only I will pick up prescriptions from now on. Okay? It's just a creative way to take responsibility for the mistakes that were made. It's no big deal. It's something that I can do. And every time I stand in line at the grocery store and wait for all those other people and I'm standing there, I remind myself of the fact that, you know, this was a mistake. This was unkind of me at the time. And that's part of being prepared to make up. Be prepared to say you're sorry, be prepared to take accountability. And these are the ways that we elevate our marriage over our arguments. And I'm confident that if you take this approach, that in spite of whatever fights you may have with your spouse, that no matter which style of fighting that you choose to use, that you will have a lot of success in your marriage and in your life together, and you too will have a great marriage.